Now, when we move from the mere concept of representation to our focus, which is diplomatic representation, we therefore are challenged doubly, because we have a double paradox here. Especially because the representative, the diplomatic representative, is the representative of the state. So we don't only have the first problem of representation, but we have the second problem of the diplomatic representative. Added to that, we have the development historically from when you had the king's ambassadors in monarchies, in absolutist systems. You had a one-to-one relationship between the king's ambassador presenting credentials to the other king, and so there was a direct relationship. With the introduction of the concept of the sovereignty of the people, then you have the prime minister, foreign minister, president, whatever, accountable to the people, and so you also have representation at that level. So given, and I'll sketch this rather quickly, given this complex structure of multiple representation, you have potentially a number of links in the chain which might snap, and therefore the chain will not flow properly. Not be so philosophical. Let's come down to closer management relations. And there are two competing scenarios, if you like, legal, administrative management scenarios. The first is that of principal and agent. And I would call this the imperative model of representation. This would assume that the principal, here being subsumed into one, the sovereign people and government, the principal, gives instructions to the agent, the diplomatic representative, and the agent acts on those instructions and only on those instructions. And so he is a very specifically curtailed agent in his actions, in his representations, in his démarches. Let's move to the other extreme now. And usually with our students, I try to start them off by saying, let's compare the ambassador operating on strict instructions, the first big letter I, or at the other extreme, totally on his own initiative, the other big I, totally on his own initiative, because he has been appointed as an expert in his own right, and the legal analogy here is no longer principal and agent, but the trustee. You've appointed the trustee to look after the assets you've put into his office and authority. You're really trusting his authority to invest wherever he thinks it would be most profitable, to administer with the least losses and damages to the assets you're putting in his trust. So this is the other extreme. It is also an extreme. Having established, therefore, these two models, I think it's useful for us to have a scala, a range of possibilities. And reality, as usual, is somewhere in the middle, between the operator, the diplomatic operator, operating on instructions and only on instructions at one end, and the diplomatic operator operating totally on his own initiative, off his own bat. In between, and this is where complexity starts, of course, because instructions are molded into initiative, which again are molded back into instructions, and you can hardly, during a whole process of representations and even negotiations, unravel and identify which bit was exactly an instruction and which bit was really an initiative, and which was a tacit or implied instruction. First, as Gareth Fitzgerald was mentioning yesterday, the compactness of small states vis-à-vis larger ones, there's always a question of relativity. Ireland vis-à-vis the UK or Ireland vis-à-vis the USA, that relativity made Ireland a small state, although it's 5 million people. by way of population, its GNP is shooting up at the rate of 8% per annum for the last, 12 years? So under whichever criterion, it's not usually a small state, but it's in its relative diplomatic relations with the US and UK, it was a small state. And the compactness and coherence of its policy vis-à-vis a larger state's bigger range of interests, bigger internal incoherence, as he was mentioning, Congress, government, etc., gave the small state an advantage. And so, following that now, and using that for the question of the chain of command, there usually is a vulnerability in the big state vis-à-vis the small state which is focused, that the big state cannot quite lever vis-à-vis the small state, whereas the small state enjoys a lever by spotting vulnerabilities in the big state. What I would also mention here as a second point, by way of small states, is something more general. I hinted at it yesterday. There is the sense that small states like Lilliputians and Gulliver want to ensnare Gulliver in a network of international norms. But they risk, in the same exercise, ensnaring themselves with too many norms. So we have, again, to conclude, another paradox. Small states would find a deep interest in upholding both customary and conventional international law in order to have arguments, in order to be able to make representations based on internationally understood and accepted values, public international law, vis-à-vis medium and larger states. The problem, however, is that whilst this gives a great strength in articulating certain demands by small states vis-à-vis medium and large states, there is also the catch-22 of harmonization of international norms without representation. Thank you.